Work session on Environmental Policy Commission recommendations for Environmental Action Plan Update Phase 1.
Okay, we're switching teams here. So give us a second. And as people come forward, let me go ahead and say at the outset that we do appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this plan with regard to the Environmental Policy Commission, known as the EPC, as well as the city staff and the community engagement piece of this as well. So, so with that, I'm looking for I think it's Mr. Lambert who will kick off.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. My name is Jan Lambert. I'm the director of the Department of Transportation and Environmental Services. We're very excited to be here with you tonight for a work session with the Environmental Policy Commission on the EPC's recommendations on the update for the Environmental Action Plan. We have a number of people who are in the audience tonight, so I'm going to turn things over right away here to the chair of our Environmental Policy Commission, Jim Kapsis, and Jim will make the introductions that need to be made. And again, we're looking forward to having the conversation with you tonight.
Thank you, Jan, for the introduction. Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of council, I'm Jim Kapsis, the chair of the Environmental Policy Commission. Joined here today by my Vice Chair, Praveen Kathpal, to my left, as well as most members of our commission who are sitting behind me if they want to quickly raise their hands, who may be answering some of your questions later today. As I think you know, starting last fall, we began the effort to update the city's sustainability strategy, what we refer to as the Environmental Action Plan. That plan was first written and approved by council in 2009 and has really been the sustainability roadmap for the city over that period of time. We have split the update of this plan into two different phases. You have the initial phase 1 recommendations in your packet. That is what we will focus on today. You will note we don't address all issues, but we do address several of them, including energy, climate change, green building, solid waste, as well as open space and land use. Before getting into the meat of it, and I'm sure you have comments and questions, when this is really the opportunity to have a conversation, in many ways, in fact, this is actually the first joint work session in memory, as far as I can tell from talking to staff and other folks who predate me, between this commission and City Council. And I want to thank Councilman Chapman and Councilmember Pepper, who are liaisons who pushed to make this happen today. It is really an honor to be with you and to have this conversation about something that is so important to all of us. If there are three things tonight that I would hope that you take out of this discussion, and really I would say are the thematic messages, not about the specific policies, but how we approached this update, it is the following. Sustainability is not about only protecting our environment. It affects all areas of our city. It's about making Alexandria a more attractive and affordable place to live, to work, to grow a business, and to raise a family. More open space, more trees, clean air, water, and energy, great public transit. These are reasons people come here to live and to visit. Sustainability is about our pocketbook. If you're a senior, we just heard from the Committee on Aging, on a fixed income, or you live in affordable housing, or you're just struggling to make ends meet, lowering your energy bill means something. If you are ACPS and you own and run schools, sustainability is about lowering your operating costs, which frees up funds to invest in our kids' education. Sustainability is about our economic development strategy. All you have to do is look at Amazon's RFP for HQ2, and there's a huge section on sustainability because they take it seriously and they are not alone. Number two, we must lead by example. There are a lot of things that we know we cannot do as a city, but there's a lot we can do. Let's not be modest in our ambition. No city, no organization, No entrepreneur ever became great by focusing on what is not possible. And let's not only look over our shoulder at how our neighbors are doing, though we should do that, but let's strive to be a national leader in sustainability. We can't expect someone else is going to fight climate change for us. We can't expect someone else is going to clean our waterways. We need to do it. 3, where we cannot lead by example, we must collaborate, nudge, and in some cases fight. That means working with our neighboring jurisdictions to purchase renewable power together. That means nudging developers to achieve the same green building standards that they achieve in DC, here in Alexandria. And that means lobbying in Richmond to change laws that prevent us from making the investments we want to make to advance our values here in Alexandria. In the Phase 1 update before you, you will see one pervasive policy theme as we now turn to the policy portion of the discussion. And that is the fight against global climate change. While some may argue that climate change is a federal issue or an issue outside of the city's control, we do not accept either assertion. We thank the mayor for her leadership in supporting the Paris Climate Agreement, and we look forward to working with you and all of council to deliver on that commitment through actions here in the city. And there is plenty we can do here in Alexandria, including making sure the city is procuring 100% carbon-free energy, increasing tree canopy to reduce the heat island effect within the city, and integrating carbon accounting into our budget process so we can actually quantify the climate impact of our investments. And as I've already noted, making sure that our building stock is energy efficient keeps our bills low for our schools, our businesses, and our citizens. Some of our recommendations may have surprised you. Some may make you uncomfortable. For example, we recommend eliminating glass from the city's curbside recycling program and actually temporarily lowering the city's recycling rate. But leadership requires facing facts, making changes, and then thoughtfully bringing the public along with us. So that is the overview of the update. And with that, I'm going to turn over the conversation here to Praveen Kathpal to begin talking about each of the subject areas. Praveen.
Thanks, Jim. There we go. I think Jim has covered these first 2 slides. First of all, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council, thank you very much for having us here tonight. Jim recognized some of you who served on our steering committee. I'd like to also recognize, in addition to our commission, some committed members of the community. With your guidance, the expertise of our commission, and invaluable input from the community, we've developed this set of recommendations. And some of those members of the community who came to our launch of this process, the EcoCity Cafe, and numerous of our regular meetings and work sessions engaged with us deeply are also here tonight. And so I want to recognize them for the time that they've put in. The first 2 areas that we're going to talk about, the first 2 sets of recommendations are on the topic areas of energy and climate change, which Jim has touched on briefly. In the area of energy, we've separated out our recommendations related to the energy use and energy efficiency for city operations. Our goal in this section is 100% clean energy use for city operations by 2023. 2023 because that's the time scope of Phase 1 of the update, and 100% because we think that's achievable. At your seats, we've shared a supplemental material, and if you look at the side that has 2 pie charts on it, it talks about the picture of greenhouse gas emissions from city operations. Using the best data we have, you see that the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions caused by city operations come from our electricity use. Of that electricity use, you may know that the city currently offsets 19% of our electricity use in city buildings by purchasing renewable energy credits. And you recently supported a budget that would expand that, not to 100%, but about halfway there based on the funds available. The picture on the right shows you that that is only a small part of the equation, because the scope of that 19%, the 100% budget request that was before you recently, is city buildings, which only accounts for about 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions, the electricity in city buildings. And I highlight this to show that this is going to have to be a collaborative effort across the city, across departments, across city entities, because we do have a significant amount of city operations, electricity use, and energy use that come from Alex Renew, from ACPS, and that's just the electricity. And to go beyond that, to fully mitigate the contribution of our energy use to climate change, we also have to begin addressing the use of natural gas in city buildings, as well as the use of gasoline and diesel fuel in city fleet vehicles. Our recommended actions in this area, which start to get at this, are to increase the purchasing of renewable energy, specifically of renewable electricity. And essentially that comes in two levels. The first of which we've started to expand, which is purchasing renewable energy credits, which is being expanded in fiscal year 2019, and we'd like to see that go even further in fiscal year 2020. To go beyond that, beyond renewable energy credits, we do need to begin doing more significant direct purchasing of renewable energy, and we've suggested achieving that through power purchase agreements where the city is essentially buying renewable electricity directly from wholesale providers. In addition to this energy supply side of the equation, we are also recommending an increase in the energy use, in the efficiency of energy use within city buildings, to be 22% more efficient by 2023. Going beyond the city operations, we've also made recommendations about the community energy use and mitigating the community impacts on climate change. This is an area, the city operations represent essentially 5% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the city or caused by the city. The community represents the other 95%. This is clearly something that's not currently directly in the city control, and we know that to reach these community goals, which have been repeatedly stated as achieving 80% reductions in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, that's the North Star that's guiding a lot of our near-term recommendations. We need new approaches. We've recommended achieving that by convening a task force on climate change, which essentially would identify what other actions we can take. No one at the table today has that set of actions that we can take to get to an 80% reduction by 2050. So we need to amplify our impact by engaging other boards and commissions, more city departments, and the community, as well as outside groups on how we might achieve that. Because getting to that long-term goal is going to require annual emissions reductions of 5% per year over the long term, over the next few decades. We've also recommended along the lines of amplifying our impact, because this is going to take significant voluntary actions by members of the community, we've recommended an education campaign that can take the actions identified and encourage members of the community to undertake those actions themselves. Finally, in the energy and climate change sections, we all know that we haven't succeeded in fully mitigating the impacts of climate change. We're seeing them already today, and we're going to see them in have an expanded effect over the coming decades. And so for that reason, we've included a section on climate adaptation. And this is clearly something that's going to affect populations across the world. But within Alexandria, we know that we need a community that's more resilient to climate impacts. You can think about flooding as well as more frequent or stronger extreme weather events occurring. And our near-term action for this scope of the EAP update is for the city to have metrics to measure our residents' exposure to climate risks. And we expect to add longer-term recommendations to this in the second year of the update. I'll hand it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Praveen. Thank you, Praveen. I would just note, we really look forward to your feedback and questions. And so if you would like to ask questions as we go, obviously it's all your prerogative, but we want to make sure there's time for dialogue. And if it helps for us to go faster through the recommendations, you have them all in front of you. They're obviously in your packet. I wanted to make sure we have a dialogue. So if there are questions now on the first section, we would certainly be happy to entertain them or move forward. I defer to the mayor, of course, on that.
Well, first of all, Mr. Kapsis and Mr. Cathpal, thank you for your presentations just now, and of course for your leadership, and our thanks to the whole commission, as I stated at the outset. Clearly, we have referred to ourselves as an eco-city for quite a while, probably a decade. I'm not sure of the exact date. You probably know off the top of your head. And this is really another leap forward, I would say, which is good. And this is an international cause and important mission that cities across the country and the world that are looking at these various commitments and the impact of climate change and the issue of sustainability. And this is really this is an existential issue, really, for our planet. And so I'm proud to be one of the climate mayors, and that our city has committed to 100% renewable and working towards that goal, and that this will help us, this EAP, the Environmental Action Plan, will help us. And I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I know you all have been working on it for quite a while, and I do appreciate the community engagement that you've also had. So I actually wanted to let you kind of finish your
happy to keep going. I just wanted to make sure we paused.
If anyone has a question for right now, I can certainly entertain that, or we can keep going. Okay, Councilman Chapman.
As it relates to adaptation, one of the things that just kind of popped in my mind, do you see an opportunity to do a conversation about adaptation and metrics as a regional issue? Not just something Alexandria might experience, but folks in Fairfax, or other parts of the region, especially as it's weather related or something to that effect, because whatever some of the changes and some of the things that happen as it's related to climate change happen to all of us during the region, and maybe there's an opportunity to get some more momentum around it if it's done regionally.
I think, as I noted in the outset, that we're only going to solve these problems in collaboration. And I think that it's not limited to adaptation. It's also about mitigation, about many of the other topics that we're discussing tonight. So I think through the Council of Governments, as well through other venues, I don't see why we wouldn't be engaging there. And I actually think maybe defer to Scott Barstow on this topic on the EPC if he wants to add anything. But I know this is an area where the city has been engaged, I believe, as part of a broader plan through the COG.
Hi. Actually, I would like to-
Scott, could you just identify yourself for the record?
Sure, thank you. Scott Barstow, fellow member of the Environmental Policy Commission. Very happy that we're having this discussion tonight, so thank you for that opportunity. I was actually going to suggest deferring to Reed Sherman, who drafted the mitigation section for us. I don't know if there's anything that you would be able to describe that's going on regionally, on mitigation, or I'm sorry, not mitigation, adaptation.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, I'm Reed Sherman, another member of the EPC. I just think Councilmember Chapman's comment is very accurate, that adaptation is going to be something that a lot of the effects that we're going to have are going to be shared across the region. And so some of the specific actions that we called for include things that we want to do collaboratively across the region. There's already a study in progress collaboratively with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on sea level rise and how it will affect the Potomac and the communities around the Potomac. That includes Alexandria, but also Arlington, D.C., and the other communities locally. And we also encourage the other effects when we deal with the other effects, particularly around public health. The effects of extreme events, especially heat waves, that those will also be regional concerns, not just Alexandria.
And so, as a follow-up to my question, I would definitely ask my colleagues if and when we're on kind of regional committees that do touch on some of these topics, if we can kind of use the opportunity that this presents us to kind of speak to, I think, what is an opportunity for us to probably lead in the region as it relates to guiding the region on how to not only develop some of those metrics, but ensure that we keep track of these things and encourage folks to take some active actions to hopefully mitigate some of them.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. And Mr. Sherman, the question also was, have you been reaching out to the Council of Governments in terms of y'all's outreach yet? I know that at the Council of Governments, there have been conversations actually about climate change, certainly in resiliency and sustainability. So have you reached out to their staff yet? I'm just curious.
So staff has been engaging directly,
Okay.
and we've been engaging with staff. So by one order of degree of separation, yes, but
Okay.
not directly.
And then at every U.S. Conference of Mayors conference, at each of the conferences, and it's every 6 months, I would say there's definitely a panel discussion. This is an issue that mayors across the country that we are focused on. Okay, Councilwoman Pepper.
Well, as you know, I represent the city on, or the council on MWAC as well as on CPC. And as we were going through this, I was thinking, oh, now that's just what we've been talking about here and there in the next place. And so I was hoping that maybe you were tuned into some of the things that they were doing. I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name, Steve, somebody from who lives in Alexandria.
Steve Walls. Steve Walls is a former member of the commission.
Exactly. Yeah. And he lives in Alexandria, so he would be a good person to be in touch with. He's just as smart as they come, and he's doing the kind of same thing that you're doing. So I hope that there'll be some kind of contact. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Councilman Smedberg.
Jim, the REC debate that we had during the budget session, are there other options other than just RECs?
So I'll start, and Praveen may want to add to it. So renewable energy credits is a short-term measure to offset the emissions that we are causing by buying Dominion's electricity, which we have no control over the source of that generation. As Praveen, I think, very eloquently outlined, the alternative, which takes time to negotiate, is a power purchase agreement where we as the city could partner with other municipalities, Arlington, Fairfax, whomever, and we can go into the market the wholesale market, and we can contract an agreement with a developer who will build somewhere, whether it's Virginia or elsewhere, a solar farm or a wind farm, and we can buy a portion of that power directly via wholesale from them, so that we are no longer, as a city, buying our electricity directly from Dominion. That is, Praveen can correct me if I've got any of that wrong, but that is my understanding. And Bill Egger, our energy manager, has been working on this in a very early stage of having discussions. But one of the reasons why we're flagging this as a strong recommendation is we believe it is within the authority of the city to negotiate such an agreement. You need to get scale, which means you have to work with others to do it. There may be some other issues related to Dominion that have to be addressed to make it happen. So it will not happen overnight, but he needs direction from council that this is a priority so that he can spend the time on it to negotiate such a PPA. Let me just turn to Praveen in case he wants to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. This is exactly what we've addressed on page 3 of the update and recommendations number 2 and number 3 in the renewable energy section. The issues that we see, first of all, is big picture. For us to achieve the goals that we're talking about of being 100% renewable energy within our city operations, this is the only near-term practical way to achieve that. The barriers to it essentially are two. One is the purchasing scale. We've seen buyers like Amazon and Microsoft have achieved agreements exactly like this within Virginia. The city operations don't use quite as much electricity as Amazon or Microsoft do within Virginia, but we are of a scale where we could partner with other buyers to get to the scale to create one of these agreements, to be the buyers in one of these agreements. The other hurdle to get over is really what Jim said is staff very, very clearly knowing that this is a priority of council to see what the transactability and the fiscal impact of one of these agreements would be. We believe that they are at and approaching cost competitiveness with the energy we already buy, and certainly that's worth evaluating at a much greater scale, and that's what we've proposed in recommendation number 3.
Madam Mayor.
Okay. And Mr. Jenks, we talked about this whole question that Praveen was just talking about. I don't know, it was probably a year and a half ago. I can't recall. It might have been even 2 years ago, because I think it must have come up at the U.S. Conference of Mayors or something, and I was curious if we were pursuing this idea. So it would be good to have an update for Mr. Egger, I think. Yeah, thank you. Okay, anyone else before we move on?
Madam Mayor.
Okay, Vice Mayor Wilson.
A couple questions on specific stuff, but I'm going to wait on those. Just can I make sure I level set on process here, right? So we have a whole series of recommendations. We'll kind of talk through it and kind of dialogue on it. Maybe this is more a question for staff, or I don't know if it's an EPC. Are you expecting us to give some kind of direction about how to bring this to a landing? Do we want a request of staff as to analysis? How are we envisioning this process to kind of continue?
Mr. Lambert.
Sure, Madam Mayor. To the Vice Mayor's question, so the purpose of the work session tonight is for council to give sort of high-level guidance to the EPC as well as staff on the general direction that is headed up. Staff has been working closely with the EPC for many months now on the recommendations. We think we've made excellent progress to this point. But at this point, we still need to do some additional work to assess some of the fiscal impacts of a few of the recommendations of the 37. There are many of the recommendations, which we agree, we're certainly in harmony, I'd say, with the EPC on the intent of the recommendations. What we need to be doing over the next several months is working with the EPC to bring forward a set of recommendations in the fall timeframe for your consideration as the first phase update of the environmental action plan. We understand in working with the EPC that there may be some of the recommendations that we're not able to get complete consensus on, and what we would be able to do at that point in the final recommendation of the plan is present you with options and impacts so you could make an informed decision about the trade-offs that would be need to be made for some of the recommendations here. So in terms of what you're doing tonight is to provide high-level guidance on the direction that we're going and understanding that we are aiming to bring back to you a set of plan elements in phase one in the fall timeframe.
So essentially, if there was something obviously that was on here that we had complete heartburn about, you want to hear that now. No, we want sea levels to continue to rise. That's our push. Or something that coal-fired plants. We want more coal-fired plants. Or something that we feel needs more fleshing out, or something like that. But just kind of a general. You're looking for general support and alignment on direction, and as you bring in the plan in the fall. Is that essentially what you're looking for here?
That's fair. I think we certainly would like your, again, at a high level, that affirmation of the general direction of the plan. There are many recommendations that are even included as part of this phase, and some of them are extremely complicated, and I think we all recognize that quite a bit more time and thought needs to go into bringing some of these forward in a package that, again, can be submitted to council in the fall. But we think we're close to being able to do that, and we know that with work over the next few months, we'll be able to continue. And Jim, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just think it would be helpful to get your honest views on what in here you just think this is great. I like where this is going. Here are areas where I don't understand. I've got questions or I've got real concerns, and I need more information from either the EPC or staff. We will be working with staff on the fiscal sort of scoring, so that when you get an actual package to consider for a vote, you will have the sense of what the budget implications are. We did not do that for this version. That will be in the next version, the final one that goes to you. So I think to the extent that this is, again, it is supposed to be a work session, so we really do want your feedback, whether it's positive, negative, or inquisitive, if you will.
Okay. No, I think that was helpful from the process perspective. I just want to make sure we were all on the same page in kind of how we envision this coming to a landing. I think just like with the previous plan, I think crosswalking where these recommendations, because it seems like there is a substantial amount of commonality with some other kind of policy efforts that are underway, either finalized or in development. And so I think where those alignment exists, I think it would be useful when we bring it in the fall just to kind of understand that, because I think it'll help us as we implement it. But I have some specific questions on areas, but I'll let you guys kind of conclude the process, or the presentation, I mean. So,
okay, hold on. All right, thank you. We have a couple more questions from Councilman Chapman and Councilwoman Pepper.
Yeah, I kind of felt guilty slowing the Vice Mayor down, because I think this is exactly what we wanted to hear. I know for myself that probably Councilwoman Pepper, in terms of some of the steering committee meetings, one of the things we wanted to ensure, and the folks here at the tables also felt that we wanted to get everything in front of council so that you can understand and hear some of the dialogue, not only some of the recommendations from EPC, but also what staff is concerned about looking at as we kind of move forward with the finalization of those priorities and different opportunities for us to move on the plan. I think one of the things that I would love to make sure all of us here are engaged in is really, as everybody's gotten the packet, as everybody's gotten this docket item before, is really start to think about, and I think it's kind of unfortunate we don't really have any kind of costs in front of us or anything of that nature, but really kind of looking at where do we want to go and how fast do we want to go? How fast do we want to get there? I think that's going to be part of the final recommendations. How aggressive do we want to be? And I think that's something, as we go through this process, as we get to the next phase of this in terms of finalization, I think that's going to be, from my perspective, that's going to be one of the big questions. How fast, how much do we want to commit? And so I think that's kind of what's churning in my brain as we look at this. And so as we see the recommendations here, and as we hear that more work is going to be done by staff with costs coming as well, I think we need to consider as a body what exactly does that future look like as we kind of not only finalize the action plan, but staff looks to implement that action plan as well.
Well,
Thank you,
these are-
Council.
Madam Mayor, if I could, these
Okay.
are sort of like ending speeches.
Right.
We got
Okay, hold on.
2.5 other sections. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, but
And I
if
was,
Councilwoman Pepper just
and I'll be
finish that up.
wanting to make some comments about green building, and
well, they haven't even presented it yet.
I know, that's my point. So when we get there, I'll be interested in making
Okay.
some comments. But just as far as we have gotten, since you want some feedback, there are, first of all, this is aspirational, and if you don't dream big, you don't get. You got to have goals that you strive for, and they're very important, and these are excellent. Anyway, what I'll be looking for, and this is kind of getting ahead of the game, but it has to be said because this is our chance, and that is the fiscal scoring that was mentioned is going to be terribly important, and we are in an environment where the needs of the schools and even the city's infrastructure, as well as affordable housing, kind of takes the air out of the room. And and then the other thing I want to say is that I hope you're very mindful of our Blue Ribbon Committee headed by Lynn Hampton, who the word prioritize was the word. So when the guiding word, I should say. Not in any way to diminish this or to damper aspirations here, but these are things that are going to require money, no two ways about it. And, of course, this isn't the budget season. Notice how his head is tipped down now. So those... Anyway, what I was saying is that there's going to have to be some prioritizing, and I would like you to kind of, as you're finishing phase one and getting into phase two, that you're thinking kind of like we can't get it all today in this budget cycle, but what would we really like to be focusing on, and perhaps coming to the council and saying, this is what's most important to us, and we are looking forward for some financial support. We can continue with the rest, but so far I really liked what was here. It's very much attuned, as I mentioned earlier, with what the region is doing, and or what needs to be pushed a little harder. And we love it when Alexandria is number one and moving ahead in a major way. Are you frowning over there? Are you afraid that's too big a bite? Okay. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say for now, but I hope that you'll be thinking in those terms. One of the interesting things that Mr. Barstow has sent, I don't know if the whole council got one, but it was a page talking about the urgency of climate change and it being addressed. And so, did you all get the same letter? Okay, good. I thought it was very moving, and I thought that it really reminds us that there are tremendous dangers in not moving ahead. With all of the ways that we are damaging our climate and ourselves. So anyway, having said that, I move we move on with the green buildings.
Well, thank you for those comments and the questions.
I'll just wrap up the climate change section by quoting Mr. Barstow's letter to all of you, which is that winning slowly is the same as losing.
Mr. Kapsis.
So let's dive into green building, and happy to keep going to the end here.
We heard that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on green building, we divided the recommendations really into two different areas, into public buildings and private buildings. So we have a green building policy that goes back to 2009. It was updated at the same time when the EAP was originally developed. The green building policy itself will be updated. The process begins to actually update the policy in September. So our recommendations are intended to inform that process, just for context. So the target here, and as context, there are 11 targets that you are looking at today across all these different topics and 37 actions that are intended to be considered over a 5-year period, not all next year, just to make sure everyone's clear on that. On the green building front, we try to make a set of recommendations on the public side. If you go back to the beginning of the presentation and focusing on leading by example, we believe that when we are building city buildings, when we are building city schools, we have an opportunity to lead and not worrying as much about the market and how the development community is going to react, because we can show the way. Now that requires a commitment, but green building, why is it important? It's important because we can reduce our energy use by building buildings more efficiently, and we can reduce our water use by building buildings more efficiently. And we know, and thank Council for the leadership, particularly over the last 18 months on water, which is we will focus on next year, but we have taken major strides forward on water, right? With our CSO investment, our stormwater utility that we've stood up, which is fantastic. But as we build buildings in the future, we don't want to repeat mistakes of the past, and we want to make sure we're capturing the rainwater so that it doesn't end up as much into the stormwater drain, so we minimize what goes into the outflows. So what we are asking for here is for the city to make a commitment that by the fiscal year 2023, all new and renovated city-owned buildings will be at least 50% more energy efficient than code. That new or renovated school buildings will seek to meet a net zero standard. That doesn't mean they must. We've talked to the schools. We're in touch with the school board. We understand the division between the two, but we also believe the importance of collaboration between council and school board and the ACPS. And we know, how many of you have visited Discovery Elementary in Arlington? A few of you, I think, have maybe visited that net zero school? No? Dustin has. So we know it can be done. It's being done all over the country now, and we should be moving in that direction as well. It also takes a long time to plan buildings. We also understand that. So if we don't make a commitment today to move in a direction, it will take even longer, because there's the planning of the building, and then there's the actual building of the building, and it's an extremely long process, as you all know. If we shift to the private sector side, our main recommendation here at the highest level is to expand the green building policy. So today, the green building policy only applies to commercial buildings and to multifamily buildings. We have no green building policy for single family, for historic buildings, for major renovations that happen in the city, of which there are many. And the ambition level of our green building policy for the private sector is well below, because we haven't updated our policy in many years, our neighbors. And so what we're proposing is that council give direction to staff as they are updating the green building policy on the private sector side, that whatever the decision is on the details, that we have a set of policies that may not be uniform across each of these different segments of the market, but that we have a policy in each segment of the market. And that there is a focus on a prioritization on reducing energy use and reducing water use, because those have been, for at least a decade, the priorities of our city, which are also in the original green building policy. But we need to be much clearer about what those goals are so that the development community actually reduces the energy use of those buildings and the water use of those buildings. So there are more details in here, and happy to walk through them. One, I think, which is germane, is you may have noted that last year the legislature passed a law that gives the city the ability to create a green development zone, which is a way to decide a certain portion of the city where we could provide certain relief to developers in order to build greener buildings, and to give relief to the tenants of those buildings and to companies that decide to base themselves there that are building green companies, green products. And so there's another thing that we recommend, is that as part of the updated green building policy, that next year that the city actually come up with its own proposal for a green development zone, which would be part of our economic development strategy for the city. I'll stop there and keep moving, and would love to get, I'm sure there were questions on that one. I'm going to move on to land use and open space, just given time. Just want to be sensitive to the clock. On land use and open space, you should know that, and on green building actually, we had our first ever joint session with the Planning Commission earlier this year, which was very successful, and the focus was both on green building, if you can just, and on open space. And I think that there are a number of issues here to talk about, but at the highest level, there is a real desire for us to remain committed to our current stated policy, which is to maintain a ratio of 7.3 acres per 1,000 residents. And as we develop more, it becomes more and more challenging to do that, but we need to recommit to that to make sure we have the appropriate open space. And in fact, we propose that the city should consider increasing that by 2023, or at least studying how to do that. On tree canopy, we have a goal for 2020 for 40% tree canopy, which we are not going to meet. That is just the reality. So but we don't want to give up on the 40%. We need to be doing more to increase our tree canopy, particularly as we are developing. And so we're extending that to 2023, just given the realities of kind of where we are. I'm going to just quickly turn to my colleagues, to Steve Malone, in case he wants to add anything on this particular topic before we go into the next subject. No? Steve is fine. Okay. And then the last section, if we want to move to solid waste. On solid waste, I think one of the main things we wanted to really focus on here was, how do we prioritize our solid waste strategy? What do we care the most about? Maybe this goes a little bit to Councilwoman Pepper's question about prioritization. Why do we recycle? What's the purpose of recycling? Are we trying to reduce bottles in the Potomac? Are we trying to reduce emissions to fight climate change? Or are we trying to save money? Are we trying to do all three? Not really has been that clear what our priorities are. And so we are recommending very clearly that we start to prioritize emission reduction, not only do emission reduction, but that we orient all of our solid waste efforts towards reducing emissions from those from that waste. Yes, also reducing local pollution as well as doing so as economically as possible. So that means establishing a baseline for what are the emissions we're currently generating from our solid waste. We do not know. So we need to do a waste characterization study so that we actually know and we can track, because we can't manage what we can't measure. And so we have asked to reduce the emissions rate after we set it by at least 12% by 2023. And then if we go sort of to the second sort of target, which is focus on reducing overall solid waste, there are a couple areas, and I mentioned this in the outset, where the data has come back, where really the market for recycling and reuse has changed dramatically globally, and we need to adapt our policies as a result. All the glass that you and we all put and our children put into recycling bins in Alexandria does not end up getting recycled. It ends up in a landfill. But we feel good about ourselves because we put it in the recycling bin, and we pat ourselves on the back that we're recycling, and we teach our kids this is what we're supposed to do. And the intent is great, but you know what? Things have changed, and the market isn't there, and so we're actually spending more money than we need to recycle, or to pretend that we're recycling something that we're not recycling. And so we're suggesting that we remove that. Now, what's the problem with that? Recycling in Virginia and across the country is measured in weight. So when we say we have a target of 50%, of a recycling rate of 50%, which we do, and we're, by the way, doing great. We're like just right there at 50%, right below. If you start taking glass out of the waste stream, it's a very heavy commodity. So we're going to end up looking not quite as good. We need to be okay with that because it is the wrong metric. If what we care about is reducing emissions, if we care about not putting things in the landfills, then we need to rethink our recycling policy. And so what we're recommending is that we put out glass containers or containers at recycling stations where people can deposit glass, because the problem is that you need to separate glass and by color in order for it to have a market. Otherwise, it gets crushed when you put it in the truck, and then it's totally unusable, so it ends up in a landfill. So that is a recommendation that we have. Similarly, on composting, we have a lot of folks in this community that really love the fact that the city has supported composting. I love the fact that we support composting, but the truth is that right now, the composting program has a net positive impact on emissions, meaning that it's actually having a negative impact on the effort to fight climate change, not a positive effect. And so we set a goal that by, I think it's fiscal year 2020, that all our composting programs will actually have a net positive contribution in a positive way to mitigating climate change, not contributing to it. That may mean changing that policy or having some tough conversations with folks who think that they're doing something that's beneficial for the environment, when in fact it is having a negative effect on the environment. So anyhow, those are some of the recommendations that we have. I'm happy to take your questions and comments. Thank you for your leadership and for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kapsis. I have a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. First of all, as you've probably heard me say a million times about the tree canopy and open space, I totally agree. And I'm glad you focused on that. I think the idea of a waste characterization study is a good one. I'm surprised that it hasn't really been done, but I think it's a good one. Let's talk about glass for just 2 seconds, since you elaborated about that. First of all, we have a single stream system, which has been very successful. And we, it's my understanding, based upon some very basic research, but that other communities do reuse glass for other purposes. They crush it and reuse it in manufacturing various products. So it's actually can be reused. That's part of being an eco-city too. So I'd like us to think about that. I'm not here prepared to discuss anything in detail, and I don't think we need to do a deep dive into that. But I think having a separated system, I'd like to at least explore the possibility of how other communities around the country are reusing glass, and while after they recycle it, so it goes into the system. Or that would have to take a whole nother level of retraining our society here. I was just representing the city at an event in D.C., and they had, recycle bin for everything. They didn't, I think it was glass, plastic, and whatever. So I do think our single stream system is phenomenal. I assume you all support that in general.
I think we support it in general. I think on glass, it simply does not work anymore here. Recycling can be very local. So if you are in a city that has a glass recycling plant nearby, that can change the opportunity. But there are many cities now that have stopped recycling glass for this exact same reason, that there just isn't a market for it in many places unless you separate it. And that is where the market has indeed changed. And the city staff has actually commissioned a study. We have seen an advanced copy of that study, which I'm not sure if it's 100% complete, but is close. And the consultant also corroborates and makes a similar recommendation about glass in particular. But we should restart recycling glass. I totally agree. But the only way to do it economically and environmentally in an environmentally safe way is to separate it.
Okay. And then with regard to composting, what did you mean about how to make it better?
So today we truck our composting to Prince George's County because it's one of these issues that is sort of a not in my backyard issue. That composting facilities smell generally, given what it is that's in those facilities, what's happening. So they tend not to be located near urban environments. And so we put them in big trucks that are powered by diesel gasoline, and we ship them, I forget how far, 20, 30, 40 miles, to the plant in Prince George's County. And the emissions from burning the diesel fuel in the trucks that transports the compost nullifies and, in fact, goes beyond any savings that we would derive from the composting itself. So there are various solutions. One would be having a facility closer by, which we could work with partners again locally in Arlington and Fairfax to try to recruit a facility that was close enough. Over time, you could see waste trucks, if they move to be more green and be electric trucks, or if they're using natural gas, maybe that could help. Or we would have to move people to composting, frankly, locally in their backyard, as opposed to putting it into a central facility like a container to a farmer's market, which we do today, and then take it to a facility that's far away. There aren't any fantastic options, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, I think to my left? Okay. To my right. All right. Vice Mayor Wilson and Councilman Smedberg.
You can go.
Councilman Smedberg.
Okay. Jim, can I just ask about the tree canopy issue and what does it mean? I was on top of a building recently, and you look out over Alexandria, or even when you fly in, coming from the south in particular, you look out and you see Alexandria, and other than the Eisenhower Valley, a good portion, all you see are trees over the city. So what does it mean to to increase that canopy even more? Is it just simply planting more trees in place? It
is, and I'll let Steve jump in here in a little bit. It is planting trees. It also is a question of maintaining the canopy that we have. Okay. And I think that's one of the challenges going back to, so some of our recommendations here are actually about advocating in Richmond to give us authority to do certain things that we are today not permitted to do. You have all firsthand felt the frustration of community members that are upset about decisions that have been made about parcels of land where there is a lot of there's a high concentration of tree canopy, and whether or not we can protect that sometimes is not clear, or we cannot. Or we need to do a better job of cataloging where we have trees today that are on private land or public land, and making sure that we seize opportunities to protect those trees, whether it's working with the Northern Virginia Land Trust or the Nature Conservancy or others to protect those trees. And then, it is about planting more trees when new developments come up, and that's going to be a challenge. I mean, as we increase our density and we have more development, we're going to have to. They're going to be, we're going to have these questions and trade-offs. And if we want to make sure that we're staying a green, livable city, and trees have a huge impact on, frankly, filtering water. They're a big part of our stormwater management strategy, and they reduce the temperature, which is part of the climate strategy. We're going to have to make those decisions. But Steve, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I didn't want to make it sound like a silly question, to comment, but you do see a lot of green, and obviously we have a lot of mature, older trees, and I understand that, so I'm just trying to understand a little bit, but I'm going to move on.
Sure.
Just a couple comments in regard to green policy as it relates on the private side with homes. Were you suggesting that we look at ways to encourage people to be more green, or actually look at policies that would implement and require green policies?
Well, the word "require" is a
that's
a dangerous word in the city of Alexandria. So, no, it's these are voluntary programs that we use as part of the DSUP process as a negotiation point to try to get certain outcomes, as we do with a number of other priorities that we have in the city, like affordable housing. We use, as an example, FAR increases for affordable housing. We now use it for arts in Town North. Other places use it for green building. So that's something we should be thinking about as an option on the table to discuss in the fall as we update the green building policy. It's interesting, as I was walking my 5-year-old to kindergarten today, I was talking to another dad who happens to be a local developer of single-family homes. And I said, hey, I'm going to be testifying tonight and talking about green building. And he's like, oh, I didn't realize you were working on that. And he said, I'm going to quote, because I wrote this down because it really stuck with me. He sent me an email actually afterwards, the conversation, and he said, time is money in my business. Clients are making the largest investment of their lives, and they want to see their projects get built. It is always hard for me to tell them at the beginning that it will take 6 months for permit approval. If a builder like me could make a commitment to Energy Star certified houses, which is a certification that makes sure that all your appliances are really efficient, for permit approval, that would really be something. If a builder like me could make a commitment and have an avenue to an expedited permit approval, I think folks meaning other developers, would get on board. Those guys, they put out their money to buy a piece of property, and then they have carrying costs for every month that they're waiting for approvals, and that is the difference between making their margin or not as a business. And if we can provide an incentive that if you do the right thing by the city on green building, and frankly, that's what the customer wants anyway, but folks don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'm going to buy that house because it's really green and not that house, because usually there's not enough housing stock to make that kind of decision. And so we need to incentivize the builder to sort of do that. And so if you want them to do the right thing, we need to tell them it's a priority, and we need to make it easier for them to do it.
One last comment, sort of question, as it relates to this chart here. Mm-hmm. We have a large percentage of folks who are just basically certified. And Carl, we can talk about this later maybe. Is it because, DC has a lot of very sort of higher end developers who are doing very high end development? There's a level of expectation there. They know they're going to get the rents back. Arlington, to some degree, we're not so high on that scale necessarily with the type of developer that we have coming to look at buildings here. What do you think? Does that help somewhat explain some of the different distributions of the classifications? Or have we just have lax policies that makes it so easy for people just to be certified and maybe not go for silver automatically? Or
I mean, we will spend summer in the summer, and part of the green building process is to engage closely with the development community to try to at least uncover from their perspective why that may be. I think the view of the commission is that it is largely, maybe not exclusively, because our policies are not where they ought to be, because we had a great policy and very progressive when we first implemented it, We just haven't updated it. And so, and other jurisdictions have. Obviously, DC has a very different sort of governing structure. It has more authority to do certain things than we do, and that's obviously an issue for DC. But Arlington is fairly similar. And these are a lot of the same companies, these are the same developers. And the idea that it is more expensive to build green is really not consistently true. For developers who know what they're doing, it costs the same for them, and they get a better product that they can, that's more attractive to the market. And so I think that's what we need to tease out in the update to the policy starting in the fall. But the reason to show you that data is just to show just the way that things are, and to sort of then ask the question, why is that? And part of it's policy, and there may be other reasons which we need to uncover as we get into that update.
And of the 425, are these all private, or is this mix of both public and private?
We defer to Brendan. It's a mix. Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Vice Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, let me thank you guys for getting us here. I didn't say that earlier, so I appreciate that. And let me try to do the lightning round here since it is late. A couple things. I want to build on a couple things Councilman Spenberg said. I certainly think, and it sounded like you said this, but I think I want to make sure we're explicit about it. Part of the difference on green building is also the incentives that other jurisdictions build in to make this happen. Not necessarily how high you set the bar, but how much you help folks meet that bar and encourage them to meet that bar. And it does seem like obviously we have a greater challenge on the single family side because 9 times out of 10 we're not really involved in an approval. There's not an entitlement process that we have to go through, but certainly if there's incentives or tools. Or as you made reference to the friend you were talking to, who I suspect I know who you were talking to, if it's a permitting process or some kind of permit process incentive, maybe that's the path to go down to at least give some kind of encouragement. I also want to touch on Councilman Spenberg's reference on the tree canopy. It's not only preservation of private trees. I think it's also preservation and maintenance of our public tree stock, which I don't think we pay enough attention to, and certainly we lose a great deal there as well. And so I think that's an important side of it. So I agree with you that I think we want to set kind of bold goals and try to push the envelope on some of this stuff. A couple things that I hope when we finalize this, you'll kind of make more explicit. On both the open space section, to a lesser extent, I think tree canopy, I think there is definitely a direct nexus around land use policy. And to put a finer point on it, use of density and height. And I think I want to make sure that we draw that out and are explicit about that as a tool. Clearly money's a role and kind of how we partner with landowners, but certainly density is a tool in helping us create certainly open space. It's been one of the most effective tools we've had in creating open space around the city. As buildings have redeveloped, so I think or as spaces redevelop. I want to make sure we draw that out. I think obviously you guys push probably the area where you push the envelope the most and kind of challenge conventional wisdom is around the resource recovery, the waste area, and I think I know we're going to be bringing a plan later this year on those issues, and I think it sounds like that study that you were referencing is probably an input to that process. And this is also a place where I think behavior is and how people behave is certainly something that we have to figure out how to understand, and then shape to achieve the results we want. And like you noted, we have a lot of people. You made reference to 2 extremely popular programs, and ones where the community loves to participate in. And I think it's important, like you said, to communicate where that maybe enthusiastic participation might not be in necessarily alignment with kind of the the goal that they think they're fulfilling, and where I think modifications we can make might get us there. And so I think that's the right kind of discussion to have as a community. You guys talked a little bit about CPACE and cited the Arlington example. You know, we had come in, I think, a decade ago. We worked with the General Assembly around legislation trying to facilitate this, and legislation passed. But we ran into challenges around the mortgage industry and the ability to make this stuff happen. As I understand, in looking at kind of what Arlington's done and what others have done, that some of those barriers have been cleared, I think, by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And so I think you're right to be pushing that, and it could be a tool that I think we obviously we can watch what Arlington has done and what success they've had, but I think it's certainly an area where we can make some real progress. I did note the recommendation you guys had around the Green Development Zone authority that the state recently passed. I can't help but think, in looking at the code and looking at what we've done in the past, that it's more branding than anything in the state code. It seems like it's all authority that we actually had before, but sounds cool. So I guess we can look at it
Let's use it.
What's that?
So let's use it.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a let's use it perspective, but it looks like they put it all in one place, which is in the code, which is probably helpful. And so it's certainly something we can explore. I do think you guys have touched on, and I think we're going to tee this up when we talk about green building in a very, very specific way. You guys have touched on this question about density bonus, and one we talked a little bit about when we did the arts conversation. And I think it gets to, and Carl knows I've talked about this many, many times, it gets to kind of a larger need that we're going to have to look at in the land use process about kind of the payload of things that we ask for and the payload of things that we use different tools for, and making sure we reconcile them and understand them. Because I think in order for them all to be effective, we're going to have to do that inventory and say, okay, density bonus is a tool for us. How do we use it in conjunction to satisfy affordable housing? How do we use it in conjunction to deal with green building and arts? So and whatever else we decide to use density bonus as a tool to accomplish. We've just talked about open space. So I think that's an important conversation we need to have. And the one final thing I want to note, I noted you guys talked about the community rating system around FEMA, and I know we moved up a rung a couple years ago. Does some of our work on, I know the things that were left to do to get to the next level were dramatic. Are some of the stuff we're doing around stormwater, does it align? Does it help? I know it's floodplain management work and things like that, but do we have opportunities there to combine?
Bill Scrayback with TNES. They do, especially in terms of kind of the maintenance of our floodways and channels help. But we had just gotten to the level that we were at, so to get to the next level is a pretty sizable task. One of our interim steps that we've been doing is really targeting education and outreach to those folks that do have higher risks, and really targeting them instead of just looking at, can I get my 5 sandbags? They should really be looking at, how can I afford something that's more permanent, that's a flood proofing of your building that you can set it up, so it's not just 5 sandbags and you pray it doesn't get above those. But there are tools in the toolbox, and so I think for us, we've been really trying to get the people that are most vulnerable in touch with the tools in the toolbox that can help them protect their properties better. That's one of the interim steps. We do get some credit for that. But I think we're going to be looking at a little longer period of time if we're really be looking at trying to get to the next level, because we just got to the class level 6. To go to a 5, it would be a pretty substantial task. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to pursue that, but I don't think it's going to be something that we can do quickly. It may involve something such as, we typically add an additional 12 inches of freeboard in terms of clearance when we require approvals for things in the floodplain. We would have to probably increase that even further, which has real implications on costs. But those are the kind of things that we have started looking at as we move forward. But we have taken taken some interim steps, and there is some things that we've been doing in our maintenance programs for stormwater management that we can also leverage as well.
Okay. And sorry, one final question for Mr. Kapsis. And you guys had talked about a desire to have additional natural spaces actively managed. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think I got what you guys were getting at. I think you were talking about invasive species and how do you envision that kind of happening?
Yeah, we collaborated very closely with staff on that particular recommendation. I'll let Steve clarify. My understanding is it's really about ensuring that there is, I think, more staff capacity to manage more land in terms of managing the invasive species. But Steve, do you want to jump in and provide the additional context?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor Steve Malone. You may see that staff has already been working, and we've worked with, as Jim said, with Bob Williams on the natural resources staff in Parks and Rec, and you may see, like along Duke Street or the Telegraph interchange, there's areas there that used to be all mowed grass, and now it's all natural, it's reforesting, but it needs to be sort of maintained. If you let it go, it could be full of tree of heaven or other invasive species. So the staff, along with a small cadre of volunteers that they have been going in, planting natives and pulling out invasives. And so it takes a lot of effort to do that. And we're asking the staff do more of that. Staff already has this in their plan. Mm-hmm. So we'd like it to go further, and the number that's in there is actually what staff said, what they've included in their work program as well. So we're increasing it from 300 acres to 450 within this time period. We'd like it to go further. And some of the comments that we had from citizens throughout our process for the last year and at the EcoCity Cafe, they raised other concerns about, hey, well, we go through, Chickapin Park and we see this invasive. And so we've also ask that staff identify those areas where there are other invasives, and this is not gelled for fully formed yet, but that we work public-private partnerships. That if staff can identify and maintain a list of, we know these parks that staff hasn't been able to get to yet, but we know there is English ivy and other things that are invasives there. Maintain that list, and then we can work with local civic associations or businesses. Maybe that can be like a Saturday volunteer program for them, could go out with a little guidance from a volunteer who's informed, or staff can go out and remove those invasive species. So we're trying to get more things in a more natural state throughout the city.
So this is envisioned to be both lands in public and private realm, right?
We would like it to be what is referred to in that number is public.
Just public lands. Okay.
Yeah, because I've suggested some areas, and the city staff said, well, WMATA controls that land. So hopefully eventually we'll move beyond this, but this is sort of the growth starting point where we are right now.
All right. So you're not coming to mow my lawn, is what you're telling me.
We want you to stop mowing your lawn and plant native wildflowers there and trees.
Got it. I'm on it. All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. So picking up on a couple of questions regarding the tree canopy, I'd asked staff about 2.5 years ago for an assessment about where we are, and the memo came back that we're at 34% tree canopy, and we've been making great leaps forward with regard to the tree canopy in the last couple of years, actually, and that's really in concert with groups like the Tree Stewards and others, and also the Northridge effort, their tree canopy over I don't know how many years has been reduced by about 50 or 60%, and they have made a huge effort, and they just in 1 week last fall planted like 140 trees that they've all donated. So working with the city staff to identify trees that are appropriate for our city in terms of native plants, which was great. And so, actually, I don't know if you know this, Mr. Kapsis, but then I organized a meeting, and we'll do it again, and hopefully you all can come, where we brought together different civic associations, the Tree Stewards and the Northridge Group, to representatives to identify a way to replicate that program, to increase our tree canopy through civic engagement, working with the city, but also through philanthropy, individual philanthropy, each person buying a tree. As far as open space, I was really glad to see that you mentioned publicly accessible open space. That's been an ongoing issue here, and I've been really focused on it. And now the staff, when it presents a building, a development, will say, this is rooftop space versus publicly accessible space. But there never seems to be enough of the publicly accessible space, and I think that's a huge distinction that we need to keep pushing forward on. Because as I've said up here on the dais, that we're not condors up here, so you can't really access that rooftop. And as far as I like what you said, Mr. Kapsis, with regard to the fact that being green and not just LEED certified, but reaching for higher goals, not just being certified, but even a higher goal is really attractive to people who are buying a home or an apartment, a condo, or want to work in a building that is silver or gold or perhaps even platinum. So there's an incentive there automatically because of the economics today, because people are leaning forward. The economy has sort of picked up on being green. It pays back if you push forward on being green. And so I think what you said was really right on target. It took a long time. I don't think 20 years ago we would have been saying that at all. But the times have changed. And so we can look at our toolkits and our incentives, but I think the fact is that the economy has actually really caught up too. People want to buy or work in or be around buildings that are certified and or silver, gold, platinum. So, but we should look at incentives. As far as land use policy, we have been using density and height, and that's we're already using that with regard to affordable housing, and when we did with the Arts District. I do think we need to be careful not to have these canyons of even higher and higher buildings. We have to be careful about the quality of life. And trees need space and roots and space to put their roots, et cetera. And so we just want to be very careful, I would say, regarding that policy. So as far as the community rating, I hope we can continue to reach for a better and better rating. I share your goals about that, and I think we all do. So anyway, I look forward to more conversation. I think, one of the things about tonight in the work session is that this is an ongoing conversation, that this is a step forward. It would behoove us to have more work between the EPC and the city staff, but also with the community engagement part of it. And so I know y'all are going to work through the summer and early fall, and so this is really just an interim conversation, but the conversation obviously continues, and I would welcome, and I'm sure my colleagues would too, opportunity to sit down with y'all and hear more thoughts. So that's what I'd say. Councilwoman Pepper, and then we'll work.
Well, I'm going to move that we receive the report and
There's no vote on this.
recommendations
There's
that
no
have
vote.
just received. Oh, I'm not.
Well, actually,
Well, anyway,
we went over
we're
this.
receiving this report and its recommendations. You two argue it out. If there's
Mr. Jinks, we discussed this at length
Okay.
at Mayor Manager. and
Anyway, what I wanted to
It says receive the report and
but
recommendations.
what I wanted to say is that
Mr. Banks, hold on. I'm sorry, Councilwoman Pepper. Mr. Banks, we went over this in Mayor Manager, and do you have something to say? It was your recommendation, and Mr. Jinks, that you specifically, I wrote it down.
well,
This
you
was
may not
the-
want to,
excuse
but
me.
would you say
I'm
something?
Reading the docket.
Excuse me. I'm asking Mr. Banks a question.
Madam Mayor, I have nothing more to say other than the Vice Mayor read from the docket.
Well, okay,
then let me just, excuse me, then let me just articulate that when we discuss this in Mayor Manager and we go over the protocol, that we are a little more careful. Thank you. Councilwoman Pepper.
Well, receive or not receive this report, what I wanted to say is that I am hopeful that you feel there's some guidance. There's a whole lot involved in this. It's really a nice report, very well done, and certainly in a scholarly fashion in some places, and I thought that was pretty good. And we thank everybody for all those efforts. You may want to, in my opinion, do a little more with the green building portion of it. But what I really want to know is, does staff feel, does the commission feel, does anybody feel that we've I think we've gone as far as we can on this tonight, but do you feel that you have some kind of guidance as to next steps and what you're going to do at your next meeting concerning this?
Let me try. First of all, thank you all so much for the time and the consideration and the discussion tonight, which really it has been the first time we've gotten together and in this fashion. So it's been productive. In terms of the feedback, I mean, I think we've gotten certainly a lot of guidance. But let me try to maybe summarize quickly some of the things that I've heard. I heard some good questions about going to 100% renewable energy via PPA. I certainly didn't hear any opposition to that. I heard questions trying to understand that process. I heard a openness by Vice Mayor Wilson to CPACE and exploring that. We've heard, from the mayor, clear support for tree canopy goals. Some questions from you, Councilmember Smedberg, on sort of what more can we do. There have been, questions on open space and how do we define and incentivize open space and what incentives are appropriate for that as well as for green building. So to some extent, you're also outlining some of the challenges and what really will have to be decisions that you all ultimately have to make on some of these questions. But I would say broadly, we've gotten some different opinions on solid waste in terms of how we should approach that, identification of the challenges and how hard it is, I think, from the mayor, and some concerns about engaging the public on glass. But it sounds like an openness to considering those recommendations with maybe some more time and some more information. So that's at least at a high level what I took away. And hopefully that also primes you all for the next conversation and when you actually receive the final recommendations in September, which is the target that we had agreed on with staff, if that aligns with your timing. I think from a process perspective, just to be clear, we have to really get going on phase 2, which is the other topics. So that's water, transportation, air quality, health, and cross-cutting issues like metrics and public engagement. And we don't want to delay even further. We want to get going on that other phase as well as the medium long-term goals. So,
Madam Mayor.
Councilman.
That second phase, I think, is really where things are going to intersect, and those are going to be really key issues in terms of also the budgetary impacts of some of this, and that's where the real debate will begin. Jim, also as co-chair of the legislative subcommittee, it would be great, you mentioned it at one point early on, given the realities of what we are dealing with in Richmond, if there are some things that you think or the commission thinks that we should have in our package that are new or innovative, that, regional, Arlington, Falls Church, Fairfax, whomever is working on, get that to us, as soon as possible, toward September timeframe.
Sure.
So we have time to, start thinking about that and get it, processed and in the package, in a good way. So that'd be helpful.
Great. We'd love to work with you on that. And there are obviously several recommendations to that effect here, but we will
section, but
we'll put together all together a list. Sure. Priorities.
Yeah.
Understood.
That would help. That would help us with the legislative subcommittee. Thank you. All right. Any others? Mr. Kapsis.
I just want to thank staff for all of their support. This has been, I know we're only halfway through, but it has been a lot of long nights and lots of meetings. We've been meeting for the last few months, if not every week, every other week at night. And I want to thank Ellen Egerton, our sustainability coordinator, who we're very happy to have, who's been really our Sherpa through this process. So thank you, Ellen, and to Jan, and to Bill Schrabeck, and to so many staff, some of whom are here. I can't see them because they're behind me, and who aren't here, but who engage closely with us throughout the process. And we look forward to working with them as we come back to you in September and again next June. So thank you all so much.
Okay, well, our thanks to the staff, and thank you for your kind words for them. And really, Mr. Kapsis, thanks to you and the Environmental Policy Commission and the community that's already been involved with this. Okay, so, well, I was advised by Mr. Jenks and Mr. Banks that this was not a vote, but if you want to put a motion on with...
I move that we receive the report and the recommendations that are here. We've already held the work session, so we don't have to vote on that, I guess. And that's it.
Second.
Okay. So we're receiving your recommendations, but we're not necessarily, endorsing anything at this point with this vote, clearly. So we have a motion and a second, and any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the ayes have it. That's 6-0. Mr. Councilman Levain is absent. So thank you.